Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. Today's just going to be me and you guys talking about important skills and experience that tomorrow's supply chain professionals must have to be successful leaders in this industry, in this field. This is an area that I've been both from a personal standpoint and a business standpoint, been very focused on for the past couple of years. Really for a couple of main reasons. The first one is, as I think about, what kind of jobs are going to be available, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. I am very confident that careers in the supply chain logistics field are going to be as important and as vibrant as ever. So I think that this is, one of those areas where if you're thinking about a career path, those of you that may have children are thinking about what kind of jobs might be available for them down the road. I think this is one of those fields that are going to, remain important and have a bright future ahead. And secondly, we've been reading a lot about there being a talent shortage in the industry. So despite there being a lot of great programs at the university level and other training programs available today in supply chain logistics, certainly compared to a decade ago, I think there are obviously some gaps out there in terms of how to best prepare students and young professionals again to be successful leaders moving forward. And I think it's great to have these types of conversations to really understand where those gaps are and what some of the skills development is required to again continue to move students and young professionals up the leadership curve. So I've done a lot of research in this area, both through my company as well as having think tanks and conversations with a lot of supply chain logistics executives today, trying to understand what do they look for in folks that they're looking to hire or promote within their organizations, and kind of what's their view in terms of what kind of skills and experiences are going to be important as part of their team, to continue to successfully manage, the supply chain operations of their company. So what I've put together here is really kind of my learnings over the past couple of years in speaking with executives and some of the research that I've done. I want to focus on 8 things that I think are important. Certainly, this is not a comprehensive list, and neither does it mean that you have to kind of put a check mark next to all 8 of these things to be successful. But I think it's if you're thinking about certain areas that you may want to focus on, or there might be weak areas for you, I think this at least gives you a roadmap or a blueprint of how to get there. Certainly, as I'm going through my conversation here, if you've got any questions, you can submit them via the submit a question button. So let me get started. I'm going to start with the first one, and that is analytical skills. Today in the business environment, in the technology environment, just about every article you read, whether it's in the industry publications or even the business publications, all you hear about is big data, and the importance of being able to take all of the data that's being generated in business, and that's particularly true in supply chain logistics operations, and deriving some insights from that data that then you can make smarter and faster business decisions from. And that is becoming a critical and very important, skill and expertise that companies are looking for. So what a lot of companies are looking for in terms of an individual is someone who is comfortable analyzing data and is comfortable with math, enjoys math, and is able to kind of look at different sets of numbers, different sets of data, be able to bring those things together and be able to derive insights, from that. Certainly one of the things, along with big data and business intelligence and in the whole field of analytics, is also optimization and the ability to, develop models and run simulations. And again, there has to be some level of comfort with, numbers, understanding of mathematics, and again, being able to use numbers effectively to derive insights and make smarter business decisions. So, one of the fields that you see a lot of folks coming out of that are kind of moving into supply chain logistics is engineering. that's certainly my background. I have a background in material science engineering. A lot of the supply chain executives that I see today actually came out of engineering, and part of that, the reason is, because of the analytical skills, that come along with an engineering background. We also see folks coming out of industrial engineering and operations management. So those are other areas that a lot of companies are looking for individuals with that kind of background, because that sets a very good foundation, to tap into what's going on today with big data and the importance of business intelligence and analytics. So number one, analytical skills, very important area to whether if you're just starting out, to focus on building your skills in that area, and then certainly if that's an area that you're already in the industry and really didn't focus on it when you were at the university level, it's something that you can certainly take some courses in to kind of strengthen your skills and your knowledge in that area as well. The second point that I want to focus on is having the ability to speak the language of the CFO. So it's one thing to have strong analytical skills and to kind of immerse yourself in a lot of the supply chain and logistics metrics, things like on-time delivery and inventory turns, and things like that. But ultimately, what's very important is being able to translate these supply chain logistics metrics into financial metrics. Being able to equate what you're doing day in and day out at an operations level in supply chain logistics to what matters most to the CEO and the CFO, which are what impacts the P&L, the profit and loss statement of the company, as well as the balance sheet. So when I speak to a lot of supply chain executives, I say, well, what's the one area that you wish if you were to kind of do it over again, that you would have kind of strengthened your skills and knowledge around, or what is it that you're currently working on to really strengthen your skills around? And by far, I think the number one response I get is, you know what, Adrian, I've been historically weak in finance, in understanding how my role and what we do in supply chain logistics matches up with the financial world. And a lot of folks are really going back and kind of taking more finance courses and trying to bridge that gap and make those connections. And I think this is critically important, because a lot of what supply chain leaders must do is build a business case for a lot of the initiatives that they want to undertake, whether it's to invest in additional talent, invest in technology, or make some business process changes. And ultimately, you have to prepare the business case for the CEO, the CFO to get approval to undertake these types of engagements. And unless you can make a strong case, again, in the language that they can understand, and how this is going to impact the financial performance of the company, how it's going to impact specific items on the P&L and balance sheet, it's going to be very difficult to kind of get the CEO's attention and kind of and the CFO's attention and kind of get that approval, unless, again, you can tie those two things together. So how do you do that? Well, obviously you can go back and take some finance courses and kind of, again, focus on that particular area. I know one of the things that I've done, because again, I didn't really take finance when I was in college, and it's been an area that I've been working on to improve my knowledge around. Just simply reading the quarterly financial reports of your company, if you're a public company, the annual report, and kind of really studying those and listening to the earnings calls and listening to the way the CFO and the CEO talk to Wall Street. I think that's one thing, relatively simple thing that you can do as a young professional to try to kind of get yourself immersed in that language, and by kind of reading the annual reports, the quarterly reports, listening to the CEO and CFO speak, that will then help you kind of get a better handle in terms of what your role is within the company, how you can potentially impact those things that the CEO and the CFO are highlighting in their calls. So again, speaking the language of the CFO, very critically important in supply chain and logistics. Moving on to the next one, and that is the ability to develop, manage, and grow relationships. At the end of the day, relationships, supply chain and logistics is about relationship management. This is a relationship, business. And when I say relationships, it's not just, external relationships with your, your suppliers, your customers, your trading partners, 3PLs and so forth. It's also internal relationships. How you in transportation or warehousing or in a logistics function might work more collaboratively and effectively with procurement, with manufacturing, with quality. And at the end of the day, that's we can talk about technology, we can talk about processes, but at the end of the day, it's really individuals communicating, collaborating with one another to get things done, to get the job done. And unless you have the ability to really develop, trusting relationships with other individuals, which then extends to developing relationships at the company level. Again, that's going to be a challenge to be a successful leader, because at the end of the day, you need to get the buy-in. You need to, win the trust, and really be able to, again, balance some of the trade-offs that are required often to get things done, unless you're able to develop strong relationships with other individuals. I remember a few years back, I was talking to an executive, and we were talking about the process that they went through to appoint someone within their company to manage their 3PL relationships, because they were working with a variety of different 3PLs, and they were trying to figure out what's the right person to manage these 3PL relationships. And what they came to the conclusion was that it wasn't necessarily someone that had deep domain expertise in logistics, who knew transportation and warehousing inside and out. What they found, and kind of who they appointed, was someone that was good at managing relationships, who had those good communication skills, was able to sit down across the table from a counterpart at the 3PL, and be able to have good, constructive conversations. Again, to get the job done. So again, the ability to manage relationships, develop them, and grow them are critically important. The other point here that was brought to light that I hadn't thought about before, but I think ties in with social media in some ways. This came out of a think tank that I did last summer on this topic, and that the relationships that you develop and grow and manage throughout your career becomes an asset later on in your career, particularly if you're looking for a new career. And the point was made by one of the executives at the this think tank that when they're looking to hire someone at a high level, one of the things they look at is what kind of relationships and connections does this individual already have within our industry. Because if you hire someone that already knows many of your customers, already knows many of your suppliers, has long-term personal relationships with some of the key executives at those customers and suppliers and other trading partners, it will be they'll be able to come in and contribute much more quickly than someone who comes into the industry, comes into the role perhaps from a different industry. Let's say you're a retailer and you hire someone from the automotive industry. Well, that individual may have some good overall general skills to contribute to the company, but that individual is going to have to kind of start from scratch to building those relationships with your suppliers, with your customers, et cetera. So I thought that was kind of interesting that again, the relationships you help build, manage, and develop over time becomes an asset that you again bring with you as you move up the ladder, either within your company or as you look to other career opportunities in other companies. So again, relationships, a very critical, important part of being a successful supply chain logistics leader. Moving on to the next one, and that is effective communication skills. And again, this goes hand in hand with developing and managing relationships. And this one might seem kind of generic and trivial, but I tell you, it's one of the areas that I think many young professionals and even seasoned executives struggle with. I have the opportunity to have taught at the executive MBA level, and one of the surprises I had was when I assigned my first written assignment, and got them back, was to see the relatively poor quality of writing quality that in some of these assignments. I guess to put it simply, there's a lot of folks out there that can't communicate either written or verbally very effectively today. And that is a crucial and critical component of being a leader is the ability to, clearly and concisely communicate your ideas to others. you know, uh, as I mentioned before, a key part of a leader is the ability to get buy-in and persuade others to, follow your vision, follow your goal. And unless you can communicate that effectively, clearly, and concisely, to others, whether that's your customers, your suppliers, the folks that report to you, your CEO, your CFO, and so forth. Again, it's going to be challenging. So this is an area that I think a lot of folks really ought to focus on and continue to develop as they move on in their careers. And there's no better way to improve your communication skills than to just do it. When I started my career, I had the benefit. When I started at Motorola, they had at the time Motorola University, and one of the classes that they made all young professionals take was an effective communications, effective presentation, and effective speaking, written classes. And to this day, I really credit that early training to kind of the success that I've had in my career to date. Um, and really, it's being in the position to have to get up and speak, even though many folks feel uncomfortable with public speaking, or even speaking in front of a meeting and presenting to senior management, or in front of a group setting. I think the only way you're going to get better at public speaking and in presenting information is to actually do it, and do it often, and ideally to have mentors that can provide you with constructive feedback in terms of what you're doing right and what are some of the areas that you can improve upon. Same thing with on the writing side. Continue to write, often and as much as possible, even from a creative standpoint, just to continue to fine tune those skills. And again, have others kind of serve as a mentor to provide you with some advice in terms of how you can make your writing clearer, more concise, more effective. I think over time you will be able to again strengthen those skills. So communication skills, in many ways, I would put as almost a prerequisite to everything else, and really a foundational skill that obviously not just important for supply chain logistics, but any field in the business world that you're looking to grow in. Moving on to number 5, it's having a global perspective in experience. Obviously supply chains today are global. Your suppliers are all over the world. Your customers are all over the world. You operate on many different geographies and continents. And in order to succeed in this type of environment, you really need to have the opportunity to recognize the fact that there are different norms. Supply chains operate differently in different countries that you operate in. There are different regulations. There's different levels of maturity in terms of infrastructure and technology across the different countries that you may operate in. And unless you understand this, and ideally understand it and see it firsthand, it becomes a limiting factor in your ability to particularly manage a global supply chain operation. So, what I tell folks is, if you've got the opportunity to spend some time overseas, or to travel overseas to visit your suppliers, visit your customers, kind of see firsthand how operations work in those countries, understand the cultural and business norms in other parts of the world, and how you need to take those into consideration as you're managing your supply chain logistics operations. That's a very important part of again growing as a leader and growing as a supply chain professional. For companies, I think it's vitally important to provide these opportunities to your young professionals to again spend some time overseas, and to travel and interact or work collaboratively, even if it's not traveling, but work in cross-country, cross-cultural teams, to get that experience. Because at the end of the day, if you've never left your home country, or in some cases never even left your own state, I think that's certainly going to be a constraint or a limiting factor in terms of being moving up the leadership ladder when your company, your industry is becoming more global, each day, each year. So again, having a global perspective, understanding what's happening globally and how supply chains operate differently, and how you need to align what happens in your home country with the other countries that you operate in, I think is vitally important as well. So moving on to the next one is staying informed of technology trends. We talk about supply chain being a three-legged stool, being about people, process, and technology. And technology is moving so quickly that you really have to keep a pulse on what's happening there, with an eye toward how can we leverage what's happening with today, let's say, big data, business intelligence, with on the mobile front, social media, 3D printing, and everything else. Really keeping a pulse on it. I don't mean going down into the weeds and understanding how the technology works, or learning how to code and things like that, but really looking at it from a business perspective. As you see some of these technologies develop, and trying to understand how companies are applying it, and then thinking about how can we apply mobile technology, social media, 3D printing, so on and so forth. How might that impact our supply chain operations, strategically, tactically, or even from an operations standpoint? And where might it make sense for us to be early adopters of some technologies, or at least fast followers? The last thing you want to do is be caught off guard by some disruptive technology that is impacting your business if you haven't kept your pulse on it. One of the areas that I see a lot of folks, a lot of folks are very scared of technology just because of the buzz terms, or they don't have a technical background. We see that in social media, right now, where I think a lot of executives, on the one hand, they might be skeptical that social media might have a role in supply chain logistics, but I think for some of them, it's just fear of it. Not really understanding it, and not wanting to kind of just avoiding it altogether. Whereas when I talk to supply chain executives that are actually involved in social media, for example, one of the key reasons that they tell me that they get involved is, number one, it's opening their eyes. It helps them stay informed of what's happening out there, in terms of industry trends, helping them stay informed and make connections with others. But they also recognize that, hey, you know what? I need to keep a pulse on this, because the people that are reporting to me are using these tools more effectively. The people that I'm working with at other companies are using these tools, and I don't want to get left out. So I need to start looking at this as well. And then finally, going back to the importance of developing relationships, it's very, very important for you as a supply chain executive, a supply chain professional, to develop a strong relationship with the CIO and your IT team, because again, IT is a key enabler of a lot of the supply chain initiatives that you're going to be looking to pursue. And unless you've got that good, strong relationship with your IT team, unless you can at least at a high level, talk about or recognize the role that technology can play in what you do, you're going to be potentially miss opportunities to drive some innovation within your company. Okay, second to last one, just remind you, if you got any questions or comments on anything I've said, you can post a question on it, and I'll be happy to answer it. Number 7, develop end-to-end understanding of supply chain. So there's always a question about do you go wide in terms of your knowledge and your skills, or do you go deep in one area? And in my conversations with executives, the answer is this might be a cop-out answer, but I think it's true. It's you really want to do both. I think it's important to develop expertise in one or two areas, where you become the subject matter expert in let's say transportation management, or warehousing, or demand forecasting, where you really sink your teeth in it, really become the go-to person in terms of that particular function, and you continue to strengthen and innovate around that. But I think it's also very important not to, on the flip side, where you spread yourself out so thin that you really are, very superficial in a lot of different areas, but you have to be able to put in context, what your area of expertise within the bigger picture, right? So if you go deep in transportation or in demand forecasting, is understanding how does my role fit within the overall end-to-end supply chain? How does what I do impact manufacturing, procurement, quality, um, uh, and so forth? Because unless you have that broader perspective, you're gonna miss out opportunities on being more effectively, collaborate with with the other business functions to truly drive, business value, right? So you end up, rather than kind of creating the silo effect where every functional group is kind of optimizing their own little fiefdom. Everybody knows today that the ideal is to really optimize or really take a broad, more holistic perspective when you're thinking about innovation, you're thinking about driving business improvement. So I think it's very important to put that into context. And second, I think it's also very important, particularly when you're starting out, to get your hands dirty, right? To really, the best way to understand something is to actually do it, to actually experience it. You know, uh, Reflecting back on my own personal experience, when I started out my career, I started out as an engineer. I started doing product, development and design at Motorola. So I came at it more from an engineering standpoint and design standpoint. I did have involvement with manufacturing because a lot of the products I designed obviously had to get ultimately were going to get manufactured. And I worked with manufacturing in running some of my pilot tests and working out some of the kinks in the products I was designing. But I tell you, I did not really fully understand manufacturing until I volunteered to be a second shift supervisor for about 3 or 4 months, where I went back after dinner and worked from 7 to midnight, serving as a second shift supervisor. And it wasn't until I was there on the floor, working with the associates, working with the technicians, being put in situations where two pieces of equipment went down at the same time and we only had one technician, and having to make the decision, okay, which piece of equipment do we fix first? Or we had multiple orders, and I had to decide which order got prioritized over which other ones. I saw for myself, the dynamics between the way associates work with each other, or listen to the conversations that they had, or listen to their ideas, or some of the challenges that they had, perhaps with some of the policies and practices that we had. Again, that was to me that 3 or 4 months that I spent as a supervisor provided a wealth of experience that I otherwise wouldn't have had if I just simply read about it or just kept spent my hour a week in the manufacturing line, just focusing on my own little thing. So if you've got the opportunity to, take on new projects in different parts of the supply chain, um, embrace those opportunities. Take the chance to really learn by doing and experiencing that. And again, as for employers, it's critically important that you provide your young professionals some of these opportunities to really get their hands dirty, their feet wet, whatever metaphor you want to use, in various aspects of the business and the supply chain. Because the more you can see it and do it, with your own hands and your own eyes, the better able you are to understand the end-to-end supply chain and how the area that you've chosen to perhaps specialize in and focus on, how that fits into the bigger picture. And finally, the last point I want to bring up is, and this is an area that even a lot of seasoned executives are beginning to focus on today, is really take the perspective that supply chain is not just about finding ways to reduce costs. It's really about the successful leaders are those that look to innovate supply chain logistics processes to create a competitive advantage, right? So tying it back to the financial standpoint, is how can we use supply chain logistics to increase revenue, to increase market share, to get products to market faster than our competition, right? To provide a level of service that nobody else in the industry is providing, right? And you see pockets of that today with things like same-day delivery, right? And that's in many ways, supply chain logistics is a critical enabler of that. And if a company is able to do that successfully and profitably, that's a way that supply chain logistics can bring value to the organization beyond just cost cutting. So again, when you are a leader here moving forward in supply chain logistics is not going to be one that can at the end of the year when they talk about their accomplishments, not just one that's going to be able to talk about how they help save the company money by reducing costs. It's also going to be a leader who can demonstrate that because of their leadership, because of the supply chain logistics initiatives that they've been able to uh, bring to market and bring to reality, they've helped the company, increase market share, increase revenue, really create, really disrupt the industry in some way that will ultimately, derive much greater business benefit than just, cost reduction. So again, those were kind of my my list of 8 skills and attributes that, based on my research, based on conversations that I've had with logistics and supply chain executives today, seem to be kind of rising to the top of the list that, uh, executives are looking for in young professionals, that companies are looking for in terms of future leaders for their supply chain logistics operations. And certainly welcome your comments and your questions. We can get any today here. If you've got one in the remaining minute or so here, I'll be happy to answer it. But if not, you can always go to the website, talkinglogistics.com, and post your question or comment there. And certainly we can keep the conversation going on there. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Like I say every week, be sure to mark your calendars for every Thursday at noon to join us here. Most weeks I'll have guests on where we'll have some great conversations with current thought leaders and newsmakers in the industry, and it's an opportunity for you to ask them questions and engage with them as well. And some weeks it'll just be me talking about topics like today, where I just want to share my perspective and experience or some of my research findings. I see one question here, so I'm going to put it up on the screen from Kevin. Let me see what the question is. How do young professionals break the cycle of not getting opportunities because of not having enough experience? That's a great that's a great question. I think one of the um, uh, self-recognized challenges that executives have is when they put together a job opening and they write down kind of the skills and capabilities that they're looking for an individual, and you read some of these things, there's no one in the world that can possibly meet those qualifications, because in many cases a lot of the things that they're looking for are involve things that are currently emerging in the industry. um, I think that it's twofold. I think companies have to recognize and prioritize talent development and leadership development. Unfortunately, I think when we saw the economy take a downhill turn back in 2008, those are some of the areas that a lot of companies tend to cut out of their budgets. And those companies that um, cut their budgets or don't make enough investments in talent development and leadership development are the ones that end up suffering long term. Those that continue to invest and really provide opportunities for young professionals to step into some of these emerging roles are the ones that are going to succeed long term. I think I don't have kind of a clear answer, Kevin, on this. um, I think that it ultimately depends on the culture of the company and how much they value, young professionals. What I will say is, it's probably you might see that. Well, let me kind of make one point. If you're a young professional, if you're just coming out of the university, that's a great thing to look for in an employer, right? And that might be one of the questions that you ask a prospective employer is, what do you do from a talent development standpoint, leadership development standpoint, right? Because if you're looking at various companies that you can work for, you want to, take a position with a company that up front invest in talent development and leadership development and gives opportunities, to folks such as yourselves to grow and develop as an individual. So that's number one. I think for those that are just getting into the marketplace, it's a good question, and to ask a prospective employer, and to be able to speak to young professionals at the company to get their sense of how well does the company invest in this area. Uh, I think what you also see is in today's environment is you don't see folks staying around companies for for very long like you used to in the past. You see a lot of mobility between employees, and retention is a key challenge that companies have. And again, this goes back to your question. I think for many young professionals, today, if they're not getting those opportunities, if they don't see, continuous opportunities for them to move up, the ladder, if you will, continuous opportunities for them to be challenged and learn, they're just going to, move on and find another company. And I think companies are starting to recognize that, and it's part of this whole reason why going back to my opening comments with this talent shortage. Hopefully, my hope is that companies recognize that, hey, if you want to keep your talent, and be able to leverage your talent as a competitive differentiator, relative to other companies in the industry, you've got to provide these opportunities. You've got to invest in talent development. So, Kevin, great question. I don't know if I fully answered it, but hopefully hopefully I gave you some ideas there. Again, if anybody else has a question here in the last minute or so, I can answer it now. If not, again, post your question up on the website, and I'll be able to provide my 2 cents there. And again, all of you participating here can provide feedback and advice to each other. So with that, I want to again thank all of you for participating. Look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics, and I wish everyone a great day. Thank you very much.